So the first company I'll be talking about is Starbucks. Starbucks had a failed attempt of taking over Australia like it has for America. In America, obviously Starbucks is extremely popular, and also in Europe it's very popular. Australia, on the other hand, it did not become successful. Australia launched its first Sydney cafe in 2000 before opening 84 outlets all across the eastern coast of Australia. Since Australians are very similar to Americans, Starbucks thought they would be very successful in dominating the coffee market. Hofstede's cultural dimensions are extremely similar as well if you look on the previous slide. The local movement dominates Australian coffee markets. The Australian coffee drinking habits are just not the same as Americans. They pride themselves on their coffee drinking habits in their local spots. It's more of a cultural thing than it is for Americans to just stop in Starbucks, get a quick coffee to go or a frappuccino. Starbucks was also mistaken when they launched it too rapidly, not giving the Australians consumers a chance to develop a liking to the brand. They kind of bombarded them with their products and their frappuccinos, and Australians take their coffee drinking more seriously and appreciate it more than an American would when just jumping into Starbucks. Starbucks also proved to be more expensive than their usual coffee spots because when Australians were in their routines, they would go to their usual spots and buy their coffee, and then when going to Starbucks, their prices were much higher and the consumer experience was not the same. So then, rather than building an organic demand for their frappuccinos, Starbucks bombarded potential customers with the multiple store openings over the space of a few months. Their prices were way too high, and they had questionable customer service. Starbucks this cost them $143 million in loss. Therefore, they had to close 60 stores, and they had to give the remainder of the shops to the Withers Group, which I'll talk about more in the next slide. So they launched rapidly, and they did not give the Australian consumer a time to develop an appetite for the brand. When looking into the stereotype of corporate cultures, I found that the Starbucks company was more of an incubator stereotype because of their because they're person oriented by working with their customers and asking them what they want to order and making the drinks, and the power of an individual because the baristas have their own power and they listen to people in command. So it's a hierarchy leadership type of style. Starbucks could be very similar in America like it is to 7-Eleven. 7-Eleven is a huge company in America. So talking about the Withers family, they actually adapted the rest of the remaining Starbucks stores, and they bought them out because Starbucks failed so much. So it's owned by the Withers and Barlow family and first opened in 1977. This family, so first opened in 1977, and it's the largest convenience retailer in Australia. It controls about 38% of Australia's fuel and convenience market. And yeah, so it's one of the biggest retailers in Australia. And it's funny because Starbucks and 7-Eleven are very popular in the United States. So it's interesting how Starbucks failed in Australia, but 7-Eleven thrives completely. And I found that for this stereotype of corporate cultures, I also found that 7-Eleven is an incubator stereotype because just like Starbucks, they work with consumers and they're person oriented and they have power of individuals as being a cash register, etc., like that. And I also found it's a hierarchy leadership style because the cashiers listen to their boss and manager, and it's the same style as Starbucks. So 7-Eleven was a very successful company adapted by the Wither and Barlow family in Australia and continues to thrive, even buying out the remaining Starbucks of the failed ones. So yeah.